It started with the sound of scraping, metal on canvas, the dry whisper of varnish being lifted after too many years. In the conservation studio of the Springfield Museum of Art, the air smelled faintly of linseed oil, dust, and old wood. Light filtered through high windows, the color of amber glass, falling across rows of paintings waiting to be cleaned, retouched, or forgotten. But the one on the table that morning, a somber landscape of a small Illinois town under gray skies, would not be forgotten. It was signed only with initials, RL, and dated 2006. For almost 20 years, it had hung unnoticed in a church basement, its surface darkened by time and smoke from candlelight. It was supposed to be a simple restoration job. No one expected it to open a case file that had been sealed since the spring of that same year. The conservator, Amelia Cross, had been working quietly for hours, moving with the slow precision of someone who understood the weight of memory embedded in pigment. She worked for the museum under contract, restoring pieces for donation. The painting had arrived with a folded letter taped to the back of its frame, a note from the parish priest who found it. Donated anonymously in 2007, it read, believed to be the work of a local artist. Please preserve. There was nothing unusual about that. Small towns in Illinois had dozens of hobbyist painters who passed away with their canvases left behind. Amelia was cleaning the surface with a cotton swab when she noticed the difference in texture near the lower edge. The varnish was uneven, almost thicker in one area, as if someone had tried to hide something. She leaned closer. Beneath the warm lamplight, the brushstrokes seemed to shift. She felt the strange intuition restorers sometimes get, that sense of a secret waiting just below the surface. When she began applying solvent more deliberately, a faint pattern emerged, like faint handwriting hidden beneath translucent layers. Her pulse quickened. That's odd, she murmured, half to herself. The letters appeared in small fragments, ghost-like, until one line began to take shape. She froze. It wasn't just paint. It was a name, and it wasn't the artist's. By the time she called the museum's registrar, she already knew what she had found wasn't an accident. The registrar, an older man named Bennett, came in with reading glasses sliding down his nose. You're saying someone painted over words? He asked. Not words, she said, still staring at the name. A signature. And something else. Under magnification, they could both see it clearly now. The faint scrawl of a full name, written in a hurried hand across the lower right. Rachel Linwood. The surname was uneven, as if the brush had trembled. Below it, faintly inscribed, "Forgive me." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The name didn't register until Bennett turned to his computer and typed it into the database the museum shared with the state's missing persons archives. Within seconds, the screen changed. The headline made Amelia's stomach tighten. Springfield woman missing since 2006. Foul play suspected. That was the moment the air in the studio changed. The hum of the dehumidifier seemed louder, heavier. Bennett turned to her, his face pale. This is a crime scene now. Detective Aaron Holt of the Sangamon County Sheriff's Department was the first to arrive that afternoon. He was in his late 40s, a man with that steady, unreadable calm that comes from too many years of looking at tragedies frozen in evidence photos. He didn't say much at first, just examined the painting under the same lamplight Amelia had been using, hands on his hips. You found this today? About an hour ago, she said, her voice quieter than she expected. I thought it was just smoke damage. And it was donated anonymously? Yes, according to the letter. No record of who dropped it off. Holt studied the name again. Rachel Linwood. He repeated softly. He knew that name. Everyone in the department over 30 did. The case was old, and the file was thin. A young woman, 27, who disappeared in 2006 after leaving her job at a framing shop on Jefferson Street. No witnesses, no car, no body. Her apartment had been left undisturbed except for a single missing painting. One she'd been working on the night before. She vanished. When Holt saw the painting now, something in his chest tightened. It's hers, he said. The missing canvas. Within 24 hours, the painting was in police custody, sealed in an evidence crate, and moved to the county forensics lab. The museum staff were instructed not to discuss it publicly. Still, rumors spread. In small cities like Springfield, news travels like smoke through cracks. By the end of the week, half the staff at the museum were whispering theories that the killer had painted over her work, that Rachel had left a hidden message before she died, that someone close to her wanted the truth buried, but not destroyed. Holt spent the next few nights digging through archives, opening boxes that hadn't been touched since the case went cold. The old reports still smelled faintly of mildew and toner. Rachel Linwood had been a local painter with a modest following. She sold small works at the Saturday farmers market, mostly pastoral scenes of Illinois fields and churches. Friends described her as quiet, deeply observant, and a little withdrawn after a breakup that no one could fully explain. The ex-boyfriend, Daniel Warren, had been interviewed back then. He ran a small framing business that also sold art supplies. The police found nothing concrete, no evidence of a struggle, no motive that held. Without a body or crime scene, the case had simply faded into the background noise of unsolved disappearances. But now, with her name literally emerging from beneath layers of paint, the story was alive again. Holt brought in a forensic imaging team to scan the painting under infrared light. The scans revealed more than either he or Amelia had anticipated. Beneath the visible surface of the landscape, a small town street lined with oaks and telephone poles, there was an entirely different painting underneath. The hidden layer showed an interior, a studio cluttered with brushes, a stool, and a canvas leaning against the wall. Near the center of the composition, the faint silhouette of a person, female, slumped sideways in a chair. Her face was obscured, but her hair was unmistakably the same dark chestnut tone as in Rachel's photos. The image chilled the room. Holt stared at the monitor, his voice low. She painted this, he said, and someone tried to erase it. The next week became a blur of reopened interviews and rediscovered memories. People who hadn't thought about 2006 in years were suddenly receiving calls from the sheriff's office, Rachel's former landlord, her co-worker from the art store, even her ex-boyfriend, Daniel Warren, who still ran his shop downtown, older now, grayer, with the polite reserve of someone who knows he's being watched but doesn't want to show it. I heard you found something, Warren said when Holt arrived. His tone was calm, maybe too calm. A painting. Her painting, Holt said. Donated anonymously, a year after she vanished. You have any idea who would have had it? Warren shrugged. I don't know. Rachel sold pieces to half the town. You could find her work hanging in diners, schools, even the hospital. She was generous. Sometimes gave them away. You framed her pieces, didn't you? Holt asked. Some of them, Warren said. Why? Because whoever framed this one used your label on the back. Holt slid a photo across the counter. The man's expression faltered for the first time. That night, as Holt drove back toward the precinct, the weather broke. A summer thunderstorm swept across central Illinois, turning the streets slick with reflections. He couldn't stop thinking about the signature, the way the words, "Forgive me," had looked almost desperate, almost written by two hands. It wasn't clear whether Rachel had written it herself, or if someone else had done it after the fact. 2 days later, the forensics lab sent back their report. The varnish layer containing the inscription had been added months after the underlying paint had dried, possibly by another person. More unsettling still, they found traces of human DNA mixed with the varnish itself. The profile was partial, but male. Holt sat with the report in silence. After so many years, the odds of finding anything usable were small. But the science had changed since 2006. What was, once, inconclusive might now speak volumes. He authorized expedited DNA comparison against the original case files. While waiting for results, he met with Rachel's younger sister, Emily. She was in her early 30s now, with the same steady eyes Rachel had in her photographs. They met at a quiet diner off Route 4, the kind of place where the smell of coffee never really leaves the air. Emily had kept her sister's old sketchbook all these years, the last thing police returned to her. Inside were pages of soft pencil drawings, mostly faces of strangers glimpsed at markets, children playing, windows at dusk. Near the back, one page was torn out. On the next page, Rachel had drawn something that didn't fit with the rest. A man's face, drawn in quick, uncertain lines, and beneath it, the word, "help." Emily looked at Holt as she turned the page. "She was afraid," she said. "I told the detectives back then, but they said she didn't have enemies." "Do you recognize the man in the sketch?" Holt asked. She hesitated. "I think so. He used to help her with deliveries. Someone from Daniel's shop. I don't remember his name." Holt wrote that down. It wasn't much, but it was more than he'd had in years. By the following Monday, the lab called. The partial DNA match had found a lead. It belonged to a man named Ryan Keller, who had once worked part-time at Warren's framing shop. Keller had died in 2014, his record unremarkable except for a single misdemeanor. But his name was on the employee list from 2006. That discovery should have ended the chase. But something about it didn't sit right with Holt. If Keller was dead and the painting had surfaced in 2007, someone else had to have placed it there. Maybe Keller had helped cover something up. Maybe he wasn't working alone. He returned to the evidence locker and looked at the painting again. The infrared image of the hidden figure haunted him, not because of what it showed, but because of what it didn't. The shadowed corner of the composition, the faint outline of a second hand near the frame's edge. Someone else was there when the image was painted. Someone watching. When he looked closer at the physical canvas, Holt noticed a faint fingerprint embedded near the lower right corner, sealed under a final layer of varnish. It was too faint to lift cleanly, but its placement was odd. exactly where a framer might press down the surface while securing the painting inside its frame. He stared at that spot for a long moment, then turned his gaze toward the small museum label still taped to the crate. Donated anonymously, 2007. Anonymous, but local. Holt picked up the phone and called Amelia Cross, the restorer. "You said this came from a church basement, right?" "Yes," she said. "St. Michael's Parish." "Do you remember who delivered it?" There was a pause. "I do," she said quietly. "It was an older man. Said he was helping clean out a property after the owner passed away." "Did he leave a name?" "No. But he drove a white van with Warren's frame and gallery on the side." Holt felt a cold wave rise in his chest. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." The next day, officers arrived at Daniel Warren's property with a search warrant. The house sat on the outskirts of town, surrounded by overgrown hedges and wind-stilled trees. Inside the garage, beneath stacks of lumber and canvas rolls, they found a second painting wrapped in brown paper. When unwrapped, it revealed the same landscape motif, but this one was unfinished. At the bottom, a faint red stain had seeped into the canvas fibers. Holt stood there for a long time before speaking. "Get this to the lab," he said. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. That night, back in the precinct, as he sat reviewing the file, Holt noticed something in the background of one of the old photographs from Rachel's apartment. A painting on her easel, partially turned away from the camera. Even through the grainy quality, the scene looked familiar. The same street, the same telephone poles. But there was one detail missing in the recovered version. A figure standing at the corner, watching from the shadows. And for the first time, Holt realized that the painting wasn't a landscape at all. It was a confession. The storm that had been building for days finally broke that night. Rain hammered against the windows of the Sangamon County Sheriff's Department, streaking down in thin, trembling lines. Detective Holt sat alone in the evidence room, the only light coming from a single desk lamp aimed at the recovered painting. The air smelled of rain, dust, and something metallic, the faint scent of old frames, rusted nails, and varnish that had never quite dried. He leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the image in front of him. The unfinished landscape, the faint stain along the bottom edge, the same brushwork, the same muted palette as the first. But this one felt different, raw, unrefined, like it had been done in a hurry or by a hand no longer certain of itself. It was signed only once, faintly scratched into the wet paint. RL. Then below it, a word, almost invisible, in the thick brushstroke. Sorry. The lab results came in just before midnight. The red stain wasn't varnish. It was human blood, and it matched the partial DNA found beneath the varnish of the first painting. Rachel Linwood's. Holt felt a hollow ache move through him. Not surprise, not relief, just the slow, heavy certainty of something finally clicking into place. The pieces were forming a picture, and it was darker than anyone had imagined. Rachel hadn't simply been silenced. Her art had been used to bury her. The next morning, Holt drove through the rain to the edge of town, to the house where Daniel Warren still lived. The white van sat in the driveway, streaked with rust. The logo faded, but legible. The garage door was half open, revealing stacks of frames, jars of varnish, and tools laid out in unsettling order. Warren answered the door before Holt even knocked, as though he'd been waiting. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed. "You've been busy," Holt said. "I heard you found another one," Warren replied, voice low. "I suppose you think that means something. It means enough." They stood there for a moment, the rain whispering against the eaves. Holt noticed the faint smell of turpentine clinging to the air. "I need you to come with me," he said. "We can do this here, or we can do it downtown." Warren didn't resist. He simply turned back into the house, grabbed a coat, and followed him out into the rain. At the station, the interview room was small, bare, and too bright. The hum of the overhead light filled the silence between their sentences. Holt placed a photograph of the first painting on the table, then the second. "Recognize them?" Warren glanced at the images. "I framed a lot of paintings back then." "This one," Holt said, tapping the first image, "was donated anonymously to a church in 2007. The second was found wrapped in your garage. They both have your framing labels, and your van was seen dropping the first off." "Coincidence?" Warren muttered. Holt slid the forensic report forward. "Then maybe you can explain why both canvases have the same DNA. Her DNA, embedded in the varnish." Warren's eyes flicked down, then away. His fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table. "You think I killed her?" "I think you knew what happened," Holt said evenly. "I think you've been living with it for a long time." For a while, there was only the hum of the light and the faint rhythm of rain tapping against the glass. Then Warren spoke, his voice quieter, almost detached. She was supposed to be a partner. We worked together, framing, selling, painting. She was talented, but she didn't believe it. Always said her art didn't matter. I tried to help her, but then she started seeing things that weren't there. "What do you mean?" "She thought someone was following her. She said she could see him in reflections, in the corners of her paintings. Said he kept changing shape." Holt frowned. "You mean a person?" Warren nodded slowly. "A man, she said, came into the shop one evening asking for a frame. He never left his name. After that, she said she felt like he was in her apartment, in her work. I told her she needed help, but she wouldn't listen." Holt leaned forward. "What happened the night she disappeared?" For a long time, Warren said nothing. He rubbed his thumb along the seam of his jacket, eyes unfocused. When he spoke again, his voice cracked slightly. "She came to the shop late, said she had to show me something. It was that painting, the one you found. She said it was proof that he'd come for her. She'd painted the scene from her memory, the studio, the shadow behind her. I told her she was scaring herself. Then she started crying, said she could still hear him when she closed her eyes." He paused. The room seemed to shrink around them. She dropped her brush. I reached out to pick it up, and she flinched, pulled away, tripped over the easel, hit her head on the corner of the table. It was fast. Too fast. Holt studied him carefully. "You're saying it was an accident?" Warren nodded weakly. "I panicked. I tried to wake her. There was blood. I didn't know what to do." He looked down at his hands. "So, I did what I knew. I painted." The silence that followed was suffocating. Holt could hear the faint tick of the wall clock. "You covered it up," he said quietly. You used her art to hide what happened." "I thought I was protecting her," Warren said. "She didn't want to be seen like that. She always said her art was how she'd be remembered. So I finished the painting, painted her out, signed her name. I thought maybe that was enough." Holt let the confession settle in the air, heavy and irreversible. "And the message?" he asked finally. "Forgive me." Warren's eyes closed. That was for her. By the end of the week, the story broke across Illinois. Missing artist death. Revealed after 17 years. The details spread fast. The anonymous donation, the hidden name, the recovered paintings. People came to the museum not for the art, but for the story. For a time, the painting became a symbol of truth surfacing through time, of silence giving way to revelation. But for Detective Holt, there was something about it that wouldn't rest. The confession had tied the ends neatly, maybe too neatly. He replayed Warren's words in his mind. She said she could still hear him when she closed her eyes. It didn't sound like delusion. It sounded like fear. He returned to the apartment complex where Rachel had lived. The place hadn't changed much. The same narrow hallways, the same peeling wallpaper. The new tenant in her old unit let him in after some convincing. The studio space was small, with a single window overlooking the alley. As he stood there, Holt imagined her working. The smell of turpentine, the hum of the radio, the brush moving across canvas. He could almost feel her presence. Then he noticed something. A small vent near the baseboard, half covered by paint. It wasn't connected to the building's ductwork anymore. Out of curiosity, he unscrewed the cover. Inside was a folded piece of paper, brittle with age. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was Rachel's. It wasn't a letter. It was a list. Names, dates, and sketches of faces, one circled again and again. Ryan Keller. Holt's pulse quickened. Keller, the same man whose DNA was found on the painting, the same man who'd worked at the shop. Beneath the name, Rachel had written one line. He said, "It wasn't Daniel I should be afraid of." The realization hit him like a physical blow. He'd been wrong. They all had. Warren hadn't killed her out of rage or panic. He'd covered for someone else, someone she had feared before she died. He drove straight to the archives, pulling Keller's old employment records. There, on the third page, was a note. Supervisor, Daniel Warren. But below that, another signature caught his eye. The co-signer for Keller's application, Pastor Michael Trent, St. Michael's Parish, the same church that had received the anonymous painting. That night, Holt returned to the parish. The church stood silent under the amber glow of the streetlights, rain still whispering against its stained glass windows. Inside, the air was cool and still. The priest who'd replaced Trent years ago had no idea what Holt was there for. "Father Trent retired in 2008, he said. "He moved south, I think. Haven't heard from him since." Holt asked to see the church records. In a dusty ledger from 2007, one line stood out under the donations column. Anonymous artwork. Delivered by MT. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. By morning, the team was tracking down Trent's address, a small house outside Carbondale near the edge of the woods. When they arrived, the house looked empty. Shutters closed, mailbox overflowing. Inside, dust lay thick on every surface, but on the wall of the living room hung half a dozen paintings, all of the same style. Muted landscapes, soft brushwork. the same ghostly palette as Rachel Linwood's. In the corner, on an easel, sat another canvas, unfinished, still wet. A portrait, Rachel's face, her eyes open and unblinking. In that moment, Holt understood. Trent had been the man she feared. Keller had worked under him, helping him transport and frame the paintings. Warren had been drawn into the aftermath, guilt-ridden and terrified, convinced he was saving her memory by hiding what had really happened. They found Trent's body later that day in the shed behind the house. He'd died quietly, an old man surrounded by his sins. Among his belongings were letters written but never sent, addressed to no one and signed only MT. The handwriting matched the faint inscription on the back of the first painting. Forgive me. The case was officially closed, but closure is a myth. Holt stood once more in the museum, in front of the restored painting, now displayed behind glass. People whispered as they passed, not knowing the full story, just the headline. He watched the way light fell across the canvas, the faint glimmer in the brush strokes, the shadow near the corner that no amount of cleaning could erase. Amelia Cross joined him, her expression solemn. It's strange, she said softly, how something so beautiful could come from so much pain. Holt nodded. Maybe that's the point. As the crowd moved through the exhibit, he lingered a moment longer. The museum lights dimmed automatically for closing, and in that half-dark, the painting seemed to breathe. For an instant, he thought, he saw the outline of her figure reappear, faint but certain, standing in the corner of the scene. Watching, waiting. Then the lights went out, and she was gone.